Okay, now a word from our sponsor with actual words.
And I'm Richard Tolan, Chief Technology Officer.
Casey Deer, founder and CEO of Focal Point Solutions.
And I'm Richard Tolan, Chief Technology Officer.
At Focal Point Solution, we specialize on-prem and M365 planning, implementation, custom development, user adoption, all the way through governance, security, compliance to Syntex and Viva.
We look to help you as you venture through your journey, partnering with you to leverage the power of the Microsoft suite of technologies for your digital workplace transformation.
If you would like to hear more from Richard and I, please attend M365 Taste of Chicago, where we're talking about a case study of migrating from 2010 workflows over to Power Platform. It doesn't matter if you're coming from 2010, 13, 16, or 19, the same process exists. Feel free to come and join us during that time. And as well as I'm going to be doing a session about cool and exciting ways to utilize forms to engage your users. Hope to see you guys soon. And I thank you for everything.
All right. Thank you for your patience. I see people are already laughing with us, I hope. And I see that this was not in the right screen, so let's go here and tell you to go there. And then we'll do this, and boom, we have a slide deck. We have speakers. We have had a sponsor message. Just a couple of quick slides before we get into the actual conversation. The Chicago Area Children First Fund is our partner for the second year round. And they're an amazing organization that does wonderful things for the children of Chicago. So please consider donating. Last year, we raised over $5,000 for them, and they used a lot of money. I wanted to say 1.5 million, but I can't remember if that's the right number, to help children deal with the pandemic and all of the working from home and all that. And so they are focused on the children. I hope you'll consider helping them. Massive thanks to our sponsors for making events like this and our partnership with the Children First organization possible. Don't use this QR code, but do use the link at the bottom of the page. The QR code apparently links to our 2020 feedback form, which, while I would love feedback from 2020, I didn't present then. Joy, I think you did, though. So maybe they could feedback on your session from last year.
It was awesome.
But in all seriousness, the bottom link, the otsn.live link does work. And the organizers will post links for feedback in the channels of the team later today. So we're 4 minutes in. Oh, there we go. 5 minutes in and actually starting our presentation. The architecture is flat.
Just like a pizza.
Unless we're talking about a Chicago classic pizza, which is actually quite thick. I guess it's not spherical, though.
It's not a ball of pizza.
My name is Jay Leask. I'm the Director of Federal Strategy at AvePoint Public Sector. And with me, I have my favorite flat architecturist, Joy Apple.
Welcome. Oh.
Sorry.
I see.
No, you don't get to introduce yourself at all.
But I am a modern workplace strategist with Pate Group. I'm also a Microsoft MVP. I've been working with Microsoft products and technologies for going on 13 whole years. So Jay and I both have seen the evolution of information architecture inside of Microsoft 365. It's tricky. Not only is it tricky to rock around the clock, I believe is the lyric, but it's also tricky to go from nested architecture into flat. So today we want to kind of give you that introduction and ideas of how to get started.
Yeah. So for those of you who have been around SharePoint for a long time, this is something you are probably very used to. You had back in 2000, well, I'm going to start with 2007 because that's when I actually started touching it. But back with traditional SharePoint, you had this model of creating a web app, and under that web app, creating a site collection. And under that site collection, you'd have your root site, and then you'd have subsites to organize content, to organize people, to organize architecture. And really, it just got deeper and deeper and deeper until we hit the core of the earth, and it erupted on us into this unmanageable, unsearchable, unusable, broken inheritance environment.
Yes.
And I don't know, I raise your hand, or I don't know if there's a negative emoji that you can use for showing, that you remember something like this or even worse. Joy, I'm sure you've hit lots of customers like this.
Oh my. I once spent 6 weeks, this was back in my government days, working with a subcontractor who had created, it was probably if not a subsite, 2 subsites deep. And we spent 6 weeks elevating folders that were so deep that search couldn't find the contents anymore, which is probably a good indication that if backups are actually running an environment, the backup can't find that anymore. So
right.
whoa, yes.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you were saying. The idea was we would inherit permissions, and that, as you went down, you would restrict them further and further. You used it for global navigation. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, as we started to realize as SharePoint professionals, or as end users, frankly, we couldn't find what we were looking for. Search did not work. The navigation was actually more complex because you had to know which folders do I go under to get where I'm trying to go, which subsites do I have to get to find the right thing. And I've been supporting US government for the last 15 or 18 years. And, the most common conversation I have had is in the DoD side. Oh, it's the beginning of the year. It's time to reorganize SharePoint to match the new logical or structure of the organization. Like it, right?
Oh gosh. And when you are working within a construct where the content down here is dependent on the structure it was built onto up here, that reorg that happens every 6 months, whether you wanted to or not, because we're bored, it's a nightmare because everything is physically bolted onto other things. You can't move it easily.
Yeah. We're talking to a customer right now about their migration from 2010 into, they're looking at 2016 as a 2 or 3 year hop before they move everything to SharePoint Online. And one of their conversations is, look, we're just going to lift it up and move it into 2016, and then we're going to implement records management on top of it. And then, in a year or two, we'll come back and we'll reorganize it all.
No, you won't.
In my experience, you won't. You're right. And on top of that, this is your chance to get users to buy into your records program that you're implementing. And if you botch that by giving them that content the way it is organized right now, I mean, I'll ask you guys in the chat, are they going to trust us 2 years from now when we say we're fixing everything for them and making it easier?
I mean, why didn't you do it when we were making the move to begin with? Because we were already undergoing change. Change is hard. Now we're going to get used to it, and you're going to come change it again.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, Joy, would you sum up for us what we're looking at?
So as the slide implies, there's too much to really go in as a deep dive, which is why we're doing a full day workshop on this in Branson this fall, or actually late summer. But let's sum it up. So as we're coming into the modern world, the modern Microsoft world is flat, very, very flat. And we had tastes and hints of this previously because we all knew the deeper folder structures went in the olden days, the more difficult life was. You can even say that's true on a file share. But as we come into this new modern world, the features and the functionality that Microsoft's putting out there is scoped at high level, not subsites, not subfolders, not sub really anything. So as we start looking at the best practices, flattening is definitely a best practice. It makes security better. The number one thing we hear is like, well, what about our global navigation? As we talked about before, that was a little bit cumbersome anyway, and let's be real. We always had to go edit that for somebody somewhere because I need this special link. So it was never magical.
Yes. Here, let me bring us to the next slide to kind of showcase what you're talking about. That slide actually scares a lot of my customers the first time they
It's
see it,
terrifying.
not just because of the incredible design on the background, but you saw how wide that was, right? Like if you have an organization that has 15 levels of nested sites,
Mhm.
that alone is wider than what we've shown you here when you flatten it. This is just an example. And so their immediate response is, what do we do with this? And it really it says something, when you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, so we've got IT communication site, a functional area. That purple thing is probably a team. If I had a key on here to show us, IT probably had 7 or 8 nested versions in the olden days. So this 3 wide is really probably 15 to 20 wide just for them. And Joy, you mentioned, so navigation wasn't magical in the past. What are some of the ways that people are, gosh, I hope I'm not going too far out of order. What are some of the ways that people, handle this with our magical nested or flat infrastructure?
The magic of hub sites.
There we
Hub
go.
sites, yes. So a hub site is the modern world version of a site collection, if we're going to be honest about it. But instead of creating child sites that are constructed and joined together, we just associate sites together to a primary hub. So now it's an association, not a construction of architecture. So I can have a common IT site that's for everyone that's an employee of IT. All of our common reference material live on that top IT site, the hub site. And then all the sites that are related to that in scope, but are wide in architecture, I join to that hub. So I get consistent navigation to all those joined sites. I get scope search results. So if I know I'm looking for IT documentation, I go to my hub site to search. And it's going to focus search on that content, not the whole org-wide content. It gives me roll-ups. It
Yep.
gives me a really clean way to work inside of my organization without broken permissions. If you're coming from a deep structure, Sarah, I believe, said that your company is trying to flatten out a deep structured farm. Um, so I know you're going to feel this, and anyone that's gone through this, I'm sure you have scars from it. The deeper that structure goes, the more broken the permissions are, and people can't get to where they need to go, and they don't understand why, and it's a headache to manage. And oops, how come these people still have access? I didn't think they would because I broke the permissions, but you forgot to kick them out. If we follow what's always been the best practice for security and we secure the largest object possible, well, that's now our site. So not only are we architecting in such a way that it's modular and it's easy to move around, we're not having to break permissions anymore. So we build for security, and you don't have to kind of pigeonhole people in places. It just starts to work, which is really cool.
I think this slide helps to support some of the things you're saying. And one thing that hits me when you describe that, right, is when we move to hub sites to join things together rather than site collections and subsites, that means when the annual reorganization happens, and it's not just the DoD that happens to. I worked for a systems integrator that every 3 years they went from being focused on a market-based organization to focused on a capability organization. And that meant every 3 years, maybe your 5th level or 6th level up was new, which meant SharePoint reorganization. So now when we have hubs instead of site collections managing that, it's a simple logical click. You move my connection moves from here to there instead of a content migration and all the risks that come with that.
So a question came in. I get that it's making search easier by hub sites and limiting, but what if we have a customer who wants full farm search, including hybrid, with on-prem and online? Is it any better with this build? I've not done a lot of hybrid work myself, but I believe there are ways you can customize search so you can get cohesive between online and hybrid, but I'm not an expert to speak to that particular piece of functionality. But one thing you can absolutely do when you start searching inside of a hub, there's a little breadcrumb up there that says organization. If I click on that, that backs me up and it gives me, now I'm looking at search results for everything in the tenant that I have permission to. So yes, you still get that functionality.
Yeah, and I will say it's kind of it's kind of me saying I don't want to talk about it, but search optimization is a series of sessions in and of themselves. But what doing this does is it enables the search tool to actually work. So how you integrate the on-prem with your cloud farm, how you integrate with any kind of external third-party sources, those are things that a search expert would have to talk to you about. But doing this means that your content can be indexed successfully. And frankly, doing this is an exercise in a lot of things. It's not just an exercise in nested architecture. It's an exercise in general information management to some degree. And so by going through this kind of an exercise, you will make your content more relevant and easier to find. And in no way am I offering you an easy button. I'm offering you a success button.
And it's different.
Yes, very much so.
We have a joke at Pate Group that anytime someone says easy, it's like, oh, you just said the E word. You can't say that word. And we'll call each other out in front of customers.
Anytime someone calls me an expert, it's the same thing. It's like, no. I am not an expert. I know a few things, but I am not an expert. So
yeah, go for it.
So this is something that you start to look into when you move from a nested architecture to a flat architecture. And Joy, you brought this to me. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you a question to tee it up for you. And you're going to say, Jay, that was a horrible tee. I'm going to ignore what you just asked me and do it my own way. But what I'm looking at is a nested architecture. How is this different than the past?
Wow. So what we're looking at here, terrible question, is actually, let's scooch that down just a little bit. There we go. That information technology block in Microsoft Blue, that's just a label. It's not an object. It's just labeling out that what we're looking at belongs to information technology. But, and I like color coding, okay? If it's teal, it's SharePoint. If it's purple, it's Teams. So, and if you'll take us just a little bit to the left on that image, there's probably a SharePoint communication site that shows up.
I knew there was a way to zoom on this properly.
And you should be able to grab it.
I can't move further left.
Can't move left. Okay, but anyway, there is a communication site. You can just kind of barely see the edge of it. Yep. That's probably the department landing page. That's company public. That's not a Microsoft term. That's a Joy term. But it means that if you're a member of the organization, you have a username and password, we create a communication site that everyone can come consume, not contribute. We don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. You can consume the content that this department is publishing out, to use an old school word, for you to use, to know about, to reference. Then to the right of that, I have a team site for application support. That's the content management site, right? That's where application support goes and their content they work on day in and day out as a team lives. The rest of the organization's pushed out. The way this is set up, there's a good chance the rest of IT is pushed out. It's just for that functional area of IT to work. Tied to that modern team site is a team. We forget sometimes that team sites came well before Teams was ever a thing, but that's why it's called Teams, is because it ties to team sites. So we use that to enhance our collaboration, real-time communication. SharePoint's still the content management bucket for all that stuff. So application support gets a workspace that's a SharePoint site and a team. The Exchange team gets a team site and a team. They have those areas they can work. And you can go in and create cross-functional teams. Maybe the help desk needs to bring in members from each of those functional areas to come join in chat to be a part of it. So they've got some subject matter experts from the organization there, right? We might create a cross-functional team for that purpose. There might be a team out there. I don't know. I used to work on a help desk. I would never do this, but where you let the organization come ask questions of the help desk, that would be chaos, but it's possible to do. So this fleshes out very, very, very wide, but
It does.
there could be, I'm saying could be, I'm a consultant. I can't give you concrete yes or no for a lot of things. There could be an all IT team where all of IT gets together. We have our IT team meetings in the general channel. We talk about what's going on in the organization. We've got a tab to the IT PTO calendar, right? We can have an all team chat and then work off in our own separate areas. And all the permissions are there. My new favorite phrase that I came up with for teams, if you're in the team, you're on the team. So you're looking at contribute and edit level permissions. So we come in here and we work together because teamwork makes the dream work.
It does. So Joy, there's a question in the chat. Are we assuming that the Exchange team site is just the default site created with the Exchange team? And I'm guessing that in this particular example that is, but I'm also guessing that it's going to be an it depends conversation. In this particular case, actually, I think it's shown especially well here in the application support team site and the application support team. You can see the connection between the channels but potentially between channels and libraries, or between tabs and things that we're pulling in. But yeah, it's definitely, you don't want to create things unnecessarily, and so again, part of this is being very purposeful. So the answer to the question being, if it makes sense to have a separate site, definitely make a separate site. Highly recommended that you think about naming when you do that, because in this case, having an Exchange team site and an Exchange team and them not being connected is going to be confusing, and lead to questions like this.
Like, why do we have two Exchange sites?
Right.
I mean, you can create a SharePoint site without that Office 365 group, or you could start with a groupify team site and then teamify it later.
Yep.
But honestly, since 2020, when we all had to suddenly figure out this thing called remote work, it just made sense to have teams tied anytime we could.
Yep. So Joy, when you're coming from on-prem, and I'm sorry that I've messed this graphic up, what are we thinking about? Like, what makes this a good thing, right?
Well, let's think about getting rid of those tangled up knots of broken permissions. So when I look at my site collection, I'm probably looking at, and traditionally the way I would architect that is more open permissions at the top parent site, and then those would funnel down and become more and more restricted the deeper you went. And of course, there are always exceptions to that. But each one of those sites now breaks out into its own, and it needs to have its own permissions. If there was inheritance of permissions there, we needed to stop and think about, well, if the permissions are the same, why do we have two sites? Have that conversation. Was it just for organization, or was there a functional reason, or did we mean to have it secured separately? It just didn't happen. That was not terribly uncommon. So it's a good time to break out those child sites, make them their own sites, consolidate content where it makes sense according to permissions. And it helps the business users have a moment to sit down, talk with IT I always say it kind of turns into therapy, but it's a time to sit down with IT, review what's working, what's not working, get help, prepare for the future.
Yeah, it has. You said it before. SharePoint 2003 to 2007 to 2010 to 2013 to 2016. Every time we see an organization upgrade, I did stop. I know there's 2 more versions they could have migrated to. Every time we see an organization upgrade, not every time, most times we see this concept of just pick it up and put it over here. We don't have time to reorganize it. And I think what many organizations have learned in the last year and a half, where they have avoided it previously, is it is harmful to the ability to get things done to do that. And in order to change mindset and get permission and get budget to do this, you really have to document what the harm is, what problems are you seeing. The permissions thing, the data loss thing, the ability to successfully pick up and go when you need to pick up and go. We've now had that scenario where everybody had to pick up and go very rapidly. And find me a person that didn't have a problem doing that. And you're looking at an organization who has spent the time to have this conversation.
And if you just look at it from just a day in, day out thing, global pandemic aside, I was doing some training with some folks that work at a power plant. And they brought in the guys that are out in the equipment shoveling coal, operating heavy machinery. And it could be life threatening for them to go search for a particular policy and bring up one that's 2 years old.
Yep.
Because if they implement an improper procedure, changes have been made to technology, that can be dangerous. So making sure that our user base knows when they go to SharePoint, they pull up a document, that is the single correct version of the truth. That's powerful, very powerful.
I'm going to jump ahead a slide because I think we talked about the bubble one, and let me know if you want to go back to it. But this actually speaks to exactly where you were going, I think, is all about like, what is the value? What is in it for me and my organization to actually go through this process? The happy user conversation is the one I'm leaning on heavily right now with the customer I mentioned previously. Is you got to make sure they can find their information, that from a records perspective, they have a single source of truth. That's a regulatory thing, not just a user thing, right? And also, you want them to be able to be successful in what they're doing. So quick load times on what they're trying to find, quick find of what they're trying to find, a standardization from one organizational unit to the next, so that when I do change units, I don't have to start over. I don't have to start from scratch to learn how things are being done.
The site performance is a big deal. Back several years ago, the number was 3 seconds. If it took a web page 3 seconds to load, a ticket was getting put in for the help desk.
Yep.
3 seconds. And now how many of us stand in front of the microwave and it's got 3 seconds to go and we're like, oh, come on, right? 3 seconds isn't eternity anymore. And you'll notice if you go to a library that has a very folder rich, and I'm talking deep folder structure, and you wait for all that content to load, you're going to sit there and go, oh, come on. The performance definitely takes an impact. When we flatten that out, we see a much faster response for load time. That will definitely equate to happier users.
Yeah. And happier admins, right? Like the lack of broken permission. I'm not even going to say happier admins. I'm going to add to that. It's happier support staff. Your legal organization is going to be thrilled, and your security organization are going to be thrilled to know that we aren't trying to fight a broken inheritance model 17 levels down, that they can run reports at this top level to see who has access to what content, what are they doing with it, how are they sharing it. The fact that you've flattened your architecture means you can start building reports on this stuff. I work for AvePoint. We've got tools that were specifically designed to work around the broken inheritance scenario. And even those tools, there were limits as to what they could do depending on how deep it went. So you're going to have happier admins because it's an easier job. You're going to have happier support and security and legal because it's now something we can prove and verify that we're doing what we said we've always done.
Mm-hmm. And as an admin, when you go to the central admin or the admin center now, you see everything you're working with. You don't have to guess. You're not just looking at the tip of the iceberg anymore. You see every site because it's represented there, which is not the case with our sub and our sub-sub and our sub-sub-sub sites.
Yep, absolutely. So I like this slide because I think as we continue to flesh out our Branson, Missouri presentation for the North American Collaboration Summit, and I say presentation, but workshop, I think this is where we're going to spend more of our time in that day. So I hope you'll join us. The question is, how do we actually get there? How do we convince leadership that we need to take this time? And how do we take the steps once we're given that permission to actually accomplish it? The first thing that I do is when I sit down with a customer and start having this conversation, it's that very first bullet. Microsoft 365 is a single solution across the platform. And I have this conversation the most generally with an Exchange organization and a SharePoint organization who suddenly find themselves having to decide who's in charge of Teams and what does that mean. And my favorite example is, hey guys, so Exchange, your groups, your 80 groups, you have naming conventions, right? Yeah. Okay. Hey, SharePoint guys, you have naming conventions, right? Yeah. So when Joy created a team, whose naming convention did she use? And it immediately becomes this conversation. Aaron, I love, you have to do it via committee to some degree. You can't have too many cooks in the kitchen, but you have to have representatives from all of those groups to make sure that the plan we're taking meets the needs of both organizations or all the organizations involved. And as you go down this list, you start to realize, okay, so IT-wise, we've created a governance plan, a governance concept that we're going to start following. Users, we need to start educating them on metadata. But let's be real. If I tell a user you have to start putting 17 pieces of metadata on every file you put in SharePoint, I'm going to get it precisely 0.
Yep, I'm out.
So you have to start educating them on metadata while also coming up with ways to make sure that they have to do as little as possible or as necessary there. And again, just continue to work your way down. I saw, Joy, you wrote champions. Man, I'll let you talk to champions, but that's one of my favorite subjects. But it's your birthday, take it.
Birthday. So yeah, champions. It's not exactly stakeholders, right? Your champions, I say, Jam, want to watch to see if you did this or do this. I would say your champions energize your stakeholders and and help drive common sense governance, help drive interest. Your champions are the ones that are sitting there going, okay, yes, Exchange people that got irritated with all the Microsoft 365 groups, so you put ZZZ in front of them so they'd go to the bottom of your list. No, we don't want our team to be ZZZ HR benefits.
Right.
Things like that. They're there to help give input, to test the features and the functionality, to help drive engagement with the business side, and to help keep your stakeholders energized and almost on task. And they definitely need to seat there at the table for governance.
Yep.
How'd
No, you're absolutely right. And it's funny, the part about a champions program that people miss or they don't like is that champions means change management. And IT for years has had to cut change management and business analysts from their staff. And this is one of those areas that when you are trying to get budget to go through this process, this is one of the biggest changes you're going to probably have to make. It is you're going to have to bring someone in because someone needs to help those champions. Someone needs to give those champions access early to the plans and the technology so they can start playing with it. And someone needs to be there to start gathering the feedback from those champions. And part of that is that 1, 2, 3, 4, what's that, fifth down, the flexibility on approach. When you start getting that feedback, you have to be willing to say, oh, we made a mistake. That didn't work. Let's change that. And I'm not saying you have to be agile or you have to look, whatever methodology you utilize is fine, but you have to be flexible in how you're doing it. And I think you can clearly see Joy and I could spend quite a few hours on this slide alone, given the opportunity. Thanks, Max.
We want to have that opportunity in Branson.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
So, Hold on a second.
Well, we have a question too. I want to hear your input on. Oh. So hashtag work from home.
Sorry. I was giving hand signals to my wife and they were not good hand signals. So she just sat down outside my door. I'm like, oh, you're welcome to, but I didn't mean for that. So when you're looking at information architecture, I like to point out that there are two different approaches here that have to be considered. There's what is information architecture for technologists, and that is your consideration of organizational structures and what are the labels that we need to do, how you represent that, what's the navigation, how do we want people to browse to this, and of course, how searchable is this content? These are the things most of our technologists think about. And before I continue, I want to say what I'm about to speak to can map to this. But it's not how a business user thinks of things. Users don't think about labels. They think about get my job done. So when I'm talking to a business user about information architecture, I talk about context. What are your business goals? What kind of political navigation do I need to consider in making changes to this? Same thing with culture, right? What cultural changes are involved in what I'm doing? There is an organization that I work with. I don't want to give too much away and let people figure out who it is and me get in trouble. But there's an organization that I work with that they have a union that has to approve of changes to any user interface, design or technology before it can be implemented. The union does. So that's something that goes right into context that technologists like. We're like, look at the capability and look at the this and the that, and then the union's going, hold on, I got to vote on that. Like, I'm not judging positive or negative that requirement. I'm merely stating that you have to think about that when you're trying to talk to the business users about the changes you're going to bring. They think about content, which I think, if you look at labeling and navigation, content kind of fits in both of those areas, right? But what are my documents and depending on who, maybe our records manager, what are my data types? How much of it is there? And of course, who's my audience? Every piece of this that we're talking about will have a slightly varied audience. And you have to consider in what you're saying to the people you're talking to, who are they? What perspective are they coming from? And yes, Robert, you have to talk to the users for this to be successful.
Nice.
What's that?
Nicely. You have to talk nicely.
You don't just talk at them?
I do have a colleague, we joke all the time. It's like, okay, now we're going to be polite. And sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, we don't even know what they're going to want to say, but they don't understand what's this going to, and it's almost a fear that we're just like, I'm going to go throw this information and run away. No, it's an exchange of information. That's important.
It is. So one of my favorite stories about talking to the users and information architecture, I interviewed a friend of mine who works for the Coastal Virginia, oh my gosh, organization I can't think of, and I'll have to share it later. And as the sole SharePoint admin for her organization, she had to come up with a new navigational structure. And she sat down with the users and said, okay, let's do a card sorting exercise. Here's what I think it should be. What do these words mean to you? How do they organize in your head? And she very quickly realized that what made sense to IT did not make sense to users. And so you really have to talk to them if you're going to be solving problems for them.
So speaking of labeling, that can go hand in hand even with metadata. And we have a question. So if each team is utilizing their own library for working documents within their team site, is there a way to standardize how metadata is applied across those sites and libraries under the main hub so each team is using the same method?
It's a really good question.
really good question.
So from a process perspective,
Hmm?
the answer is planning. Like that's the only way to do it is planning, and not just one-time planning, but then actually like revisiting the plan and checking and verifying that the plan is being followed. That's my immediate one is that. What's your first take on that, Joy? What do you think?
I remember the good old days of the content type hub.
Mm-hmm.
And was I dreaming one day, or was something said about maybe one day having that functionality at the hub site level? Definitely a wish list item of mine.
Right, right. I have heard about being able to standardize across hub sites. Ooh, I don't remember where though.
Yeah. So, but, and I'm going to play I'm going to try to talk. I'm going to play devil's advocate on that one for just a second too,
Sure.
because I totally see where you're coming from with that concept. Going, hey, standardize your metadata and search shines. But there's also, it's like, well, if it's everybody's own team, why do we care about standardized metadata if the permissions don't cross? So I guess we flip that coin a few times and see how is the permissioning working? Am I in those multiple teams where if I had standardized metadata,
Mm-hmm.
my search experience as an employee would be enhanced by that happening?
Right.
If there's not a lot of that, I would go, I don't know that I'd worry about it much until I
Right.
saw a benefit to having it.
I will add to that. From a user experience, you're 100% correct. The other consideration you have to have and I don't think it's been mentioned yet, is regulatory control. Whether that's records management or it's a different regulation that might be internal or governmental that has to control what you're doing. So there may be a requirement to have that standardization of data. Where I would say Joy's statement still applies is if you look at your data and think, I need 17 pieces of metadata to standardize across all of my site collections, I would challenge you, A, do you really? Does it enhance the business function? And B, when you do that, look at your regulatory controls and figure out what is the actual minimum requirement to be successful against those controls before I start to mess with my users' abilities to be successful. Like you gotta consider that balance. I will say if you can't do it natively, as a vendor, I won't name drop products or anything like that, but we actually have a case where we are supporting a customer who is building a records platform in SharePoint Online, and they're using us to help standardize the metadata at the folder and container level across all of their teams and all of their SharePoint site collections. So there are ways. It may not be native. You may have to expand your horizons. And this is where, when I have cloud readiness conversations, I remind people that there's a reason Microsoft has such a large third-party network of partners. Yeah.
And to flip the coin over to the communication side of the world, now when it comes to that, and you're looking for company public data that every member of the organization should be able to find and consume, have those standardized metadata conversations from day one. Do it, do it, do it, do it,
Yep.
do it, do it. Especially if your policies and procedures are going to be scattered about.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So we're nearing the end of time. I think one other area that I expect we'll spend a lot of time in Branson, and I'm excited that we're going to have that time, is in this what I call the best practice approach. Sorry, not the a best practice approach to designing your information architecture. There are technology labels on each of these containers. Generally speaking, when I first show this slide, I don't show the technology labels because the technology is not what's important when you first start this exercise. But what I walk customers through is identifying the types of containers and purposes that they expect to have in their organization. I need a space for a team to be able to disseminate information and to be able to collaborate on their processes. That's probably going to be a SharePoint site collection and a team, maybe separated from a communication site perspective, maybe joined at the hip, depends on what the exact need is. But you're going to go through this exercise. I need communities for communities of interest or communities of practice or expertise or whatever they're called at your organization. So that, like when I worked at Booz Allen, we had a SharePoint community of practice, 1,000 plus SharePoint professionals from around the world who got together twice a month to share experiences, to share information about the technology, to share case studies of what they were doing with their customers, so that we could standardize how we were supporting our customers, right? Being able to identify these workspaces means that you can now start to attach technologies to that. You can now start to create templates that can be deployed when new workspaces are requested. You can now start to predefine policies that go against these workspaces, so that when a community of practices stood up, I'm going to attach a Yammer site to it because we have access to Yammer. I'm going to attach a stream to it to enable the knowledge sharing and capabilities around the videos and such. Like, those are the things I might attach there. When we have an extranet space, I'm going to create a team for it, and I'm going to turn guest access on in that team. But I'm also going to set some label instructions so that only particular types of information can be shared there. I'm also going to set a renewal policy and a recertification policy so that every month the users in that extranet space have to be recertified to make sure that it's being used accurately by the people who need to have access to it. So going through an exercise like this will enable you to start designing what that IA can look like and how to secure it, and answer questions like, how do we secure it? How do we protect the data? What SLAs do we need on each of these spaces? Because the running club doesn't need a 4-hour recovery time, but that special project out of the CIO's office probably does. So these are the kinds of exercises that I walk through with my customers.
And there's been one that's a little bit more micro than this, because this is a pretty macro slide when you're looking at your architecture. But don't diminish the value of sitting down with your business users, exploring their folder structures inside of their libraries, and helping them visualize how those sub folder labels can be metadata in a column. How to create grouped views, how to flatten out those folder structures, because the architecture isn't just flat at the site level, it's flat inside the site as well. And it's a big deal.
It is.
But don't
right?
Right. We all take a deep breath, because it is different. It's very, very different. But once you show people, hey, if you flatten out that library, now you can not just sort and filter your content. You can slice and dice it just like you could if those documents were spread out on a spreadsheet, right? Your documents are going to load faster because it's a flat architecture and the page is going to render faster. You don't have to mess with broken permissions anymore. Yeah, it's a lot of sites, but it was always a lot of sites. You just couldn't see them all because they were nested down deeply. You've always had the same number of sites. Now they're just all broken out where we can see them.
Yep. There's a lot to it.
So much.
The one word I walk away from this concept with over and over again is planning. If you plan, there's no need to panic. If you pause and decide, hey, we're gonna take this chunk of the project right now, and let's see how far we can get on this little chunk before we do everything all at once. There are ways to build towards a flat architecture, but the one thing I would say, Joe, you said this very early on, is if you assume you're going to do it after, you're not.
Because you get busy.
Yeah. after will become after the next thing and after the next thing, because people have survived for so long. But the goal of this conversation, the goal of the ideas that we're trying to suggest are things can be better. It takes an effort. So we're right on time, I think. As Joy mentioned, and we've name dropped a few times, the North American Collaboration Summit is coming up in August. We will be in person in Branson. Very excited to be at an in-person conference again. We have a full day workshop covering these topics, digging into and actually working with the participants to help have them develop a flat architecture, not just preaching at them, but really interactively getting them to do it. You can choose if you like Joy or Jay better by using our discount codes and getting $50 off your registration.
I'm just saying it's my birthday though. So if you use Joy 50, that would be sweet.
Yes, I will give you that one. If you can't remember collabsummit.org and you go to the conference website under sponsors, the NACS is actually a community partner, so you can go down to the bottom and click through to that. And hopefully we'll see some of you there. And thank you. Feel free to, jump out on Twitter and connect with both of us or the one of us, either way. And by all means, please go to this short link. Again, I know as an organizer, I'll make sure it's posted in the community. But go to this short link and give both us and the conference feedback so that all around things can be improved and delivered in a way that makes the most sense.
And thank you. Thank you for the questions and the observations and the interactions. And you guys are fantastic. We appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your day. As an organizer, I hope it is smooth. It's been a crazy day.
You got this.